Adoptive parents who return their child. What was your reason? Story 1. My wife and I adopted 4 brothers 10 years ago, and it has been a seemingly everlasting graduate course in mental health, special education, children's rights and laws, restraint, physical and mental, and disaster recovery. When a child gets to the point of being adopted, they have likely experienced and seen things that no child should ever experience or see. These experiences create long-lasting issues for which society has no support mechanisms to mitigate the symptoms, let alone the underlying issues. What we have learned is that the basis for our society is formed in the first months of a child's life by what seems like such simple, basic things. The ability to bond with others, touching, interacting, stimulation, the knowledge that their needs will be met, food and water, diaper changes, sleep time, safety, sense of control, and the knowledge that they're wanted and appreciated. The simple cycle of the baby crying, getting attention, getting food, and being put safely in the crib teaches the baby that when they cry, their needs will be met and they are wanted. These basic learning experiences keep our society functioning. Imagine an infancy where no one attends to every baby's cry and the babies might be fed and changed in a schedule or not. What do the babies learn? They are not in control. Many of these babies will spend their lives trying to take control, often taking control of failure because control of a failure is still controlled. Their controlled failure reassures their belief that they are not wanted or deserving. Imagine that an infant is maltreated in such a way that it creates an indelible memory. How does that child deal with the memory of the trauma once he has been told they have mastery of a language? How do they describe the horror that has no words? Who can they talk to about what they cannot put into words? An adoptive parent might have a child who, in the process of trying to take control, creates complete chaos, such as by breaking windows, throwing around dishware and silverware, throwing toys, or acting out. So as an adoptive parent, how would you respond to a younger child is chasing his older brother with a weapon in his hands because he stole his younger brother's food? An out-of-control child who, when you call the local emergency psych team, sends out an evaluation officer who, after 15 minutes of interaction, runs out of the house screaming, "There's nothing I can do here." When you figure out one of the kids is doing bad things to pets, how do you deal with bottles of whiz in the kid's bedroom after they tell you, "Bad things happen to people who go to the bathroom at night"? Being sucker-punched by a 180-pound, 12-stone son who does not want to do chores. With a kid who is into self-harm, what do you do with a child who still sucks his thumb? A kid who cannot go into any store without stealing at least one item. The smell of dirty bathroom because of their odd behavior. Having to lock all rooms and closets that the kids do not require access to. Oh, stop now. You get the point. We deal with these things one day at a time. We understand others are either more sane or less able to deal with the nonsense than we are, but we understand why someone might feel overwhelmed by an adoption and want to run away. I would be lying if I told you we had not had the thought more than once of sending the kids back. But we deal with these things one day at a time. My wife and I often ask if we are dumber, stronger, or just more tolerant to cope with the nonsense. Finally, if you feel compelled to say you and your wife are saints for adopting the boys, please restrain yourself. Adopting 4 brothers was a moment of insanity. While we have no regrets, we would not do it again and do not recommend anyone else adopt 4 older siblings without a long, protracted discussion with adoptive parents outside of the agency that desires to place the kids. Man, that sounds completely overwhelming. Props to this couple. Story 2. I have a friend who was adopted from Russia, and aside from being a little behind in school, he's a normal kid. His parents couldn't have children, so they flew to Russia to adopt a girl, him and his biological older sister. Well, when they got to the care facility, they went to pick up all the kids who were all in separate rooms. They got my friend and his non-biological sister, but for some reason, they wouldn't let them see the biological sister. The parents spent the night there, expecting they'd see their daughter the next morning. Finally, the caretakers bring them to the little girl. When the girl saw them, she started throwing her toys, screaming, pulling her hair out, and going crazy. They decided not to adopt her. The mother told me she now regrets it. She believes the orphanage told the girl to act that way because another family might have offered more money. The whole trip there was suspicious, she told me, and if she had a choice, she would have demanded to adopt her anyway. Story 3. I went to elementary school with this quiet kid named Daniel. He had really bad speech problems, but the only thing I ever heard him clearly say was how excited he was about his new adopted sister. Now, honestly, I didn't like Daniel. He was annoying and smelled bad, but my friend, let's call her Kathy, was his best friend. They spent all their time together and she regularly visited his house. At the beginning of 4th grade, Daniel's family adopts this adorable little girl. She was really shy and couldn't speak English. Halfway through our 4th grade year, though, Daniel stops coming to his school. I talked to Kathy and she told me that his family wouldn't answer the phone. Kathy and her mother eventually went to Daniel's house to see what was up. His mom told him that they returned their daughter because she was trouble and too immature. Daniel and his family moved away after that. I have no idea why they would have given up their daughter. I know adoptive children tend to have issues, but giving up a tiny child who needs your help sounds selfish. Story 4. I had a neighbor named Melissa. She was about my age and her brother was slightly older, Giovanni. I remember when they moved in because her baby brother was named Kermit, and I thought that was extremely bizarre. She was eccentric, to say the least. My mom let her come over pretty much whenever she wanted during the summer because she always seemed to be ignored by her parents. Giovanni used to come over too, but I remember he would leave a lot to go run errands with his parents or for dinner. Whenever I asked if she had to go, she said she couldn't eat what they could or go with them anywhere. They basically shushed her out of the house. She was rarely bathed and was very skinny. Her parents never even asked mine or anyone else's if it was okay that she was gone for days at a time. It wasn't just me. She was friends with other kids in the neighborhood. No one was looking for a scoop. Everyone wanted to make sure she was being cared for. And her mother was cold. She left her child with strangers or roamed the neighborhood after dark. It was concerning, so I told my parents. My mom tried making friends with her mom several times, but the woman was just cold. Anyway, it turns out Melissa was adopted. I'm not sure how my mom found out, but I remember coming home from school one day and Melissa wasn't there. She normally waits outside of my house. A week or more passed, but she still didn't come over. Her neighbor was very gossipy, but someone found out that they gave her back because she was chatty and they originally wanted all boys. Her family moved out shortly after this. Damn, this story just broke my heart a little. If being given back is hard for adopted children, the teacher in the next story went through something even more traumatic. Story 5. My chemistry teacher in high school did this. She was unable to bear children for whatever reason, so she looked into adoption. She was obviously very excited and shared the news with her students. There was a very young mother who was looking to give her child to her. After she was born, she brought pictures of her new daughter to class, and we spent the first couple of minutes sharing that moment before we returned to balancing equations and other chemistry stuff. Well, it turns out that in the adoption process, the birth mother has something like 60 days to change her mind, nullify the contract, and ask for her child back, something that both parties sign off on. On day 59, the birth mother changed her mind and insisted that she wanted her kid now, so my teacher had to return her daughter. The next day, she came to school as composed as one can be after such a traumatic event, but we all could tell she had been crying before she started her lecture and barely made it through the period without breaking down and running away in class. I don't want to vilify the birth mother too much, but she did wait until almost the last minute to change her mind, and my teacher surely thought this was all but a done deal. We can't imagine the heartbreak of returning home to an empty crib. Story 6. I used to work in children's services and knew a few kids who were returned. I actually agreed with the parents in some of those cases. In a couple of cases, the parents really shouldn't have adopted a kid who was known to be troubled. In one of them, they found out that their adopted son, who had been very badly violated himself, was doing the same thing to his sister, and there were indications that he was also doing it to the twin toddlers. They remained involved in his life after he was placed in the care of the state. They still cared about him but didn't feel the other kids in the house were safe. Another boy's family decided to return him to the care of the state when one day, they came home to find he had shattered the toilet with a hammer. He also creeped out the couple's teenage daughter to the point where she was threatening to run away to get away from him. To our knowledge, he never did anything to her. I knew of a few others, but those two stood out the most. Bear in mind that I also worked with very disturbed boys, so I didn't meet the kids that were returned because the parents were crazy. One of the sadder ones to me was a kid who had grown up roughly in every way possible, and a kind but very naive couple adopted him. They didn't listen to any advice we tried to give them because they knew that love conquers all, and figured that if they were just nice enough, it would be all better in a few months or maybe a year. They thought at the high end that after 2 years he would be a normal kid. They weren't prepared for his baggage at all. My understanding was that he did get better after some years with them, but after a while, they just gave up and gave him back. It destroyed him, and any progress he made vanished. Man, those are really sad stories. I hope those kids get the help they need. These stories are not really horrible, but just deeply saddening. On the brighter side, though, these are not the only kinds of stories in my videos, so if you want to watch other stuff, just like this video and subscribe to my channel. I can guarantee you that you'll love all my videos. Story 7. My parents adopted twice in the early 80s. Back then, you didn't know anything about the background of the child, nor was there any training for the adopted family or any support services following the adoption. We adopted a boy and all was well for a couple of months. Then his real colors started to show. He was violent and combative, to the point of being physical with my mother. Now we know we had something like combative detachment disorder. After 4 years of tears, prayers, and effort, his birth grandparents readopted him. At the same time, we adopted a girl who we now know was a baby. She has a list of 3- and 4-letter problems that would fill a sheet of paper. She has physical problems, mental issues, and lots of emotional problems, most notably RAD, reactive attachment disorder, which means she's incapable of accepting and returning affection. By the time she was in middle school, I was having to physically restrain her from being physical with my mom. We all locked our doors to sleep due to nightly threats, and anything that could be used as a weapon had to be locked up. Once she got large enough, my mom had to call the police several times to get her to calm down, and eventually, my parents put her in a private girls' home. The money to pay for my college went to pay for her care, and when she turned 18, she signed herself out and is currently a dancer and junkie in Vegas. I am incredibly bitter at the system that did not prepare my family for what we were getting into, or at least provide help after the fact. I have had years of therapy to deal with my emotional damage, and I still regularly have nightmares of either of those kids harming my parents. Sadder, though, is what it did to my parents. They're still heartbroken and think they somehow failed these kids. Sadder still, these kids could have had a much better chance if the adoptive services had been more thorough. Story 8. I was adopted when I was young. I wasn't given back, but it was almost hell. I just came to say that you need to be a really caring person if you're going to adopt any kid older than a baby. I was ripped from my family and thrown in with a woman who thought to completely change me instead of accepting me for who I was. I got PTSD from the day I was given to my adoptive family. Severe self-hatred because I've never lived up to the standards set by my adoptive mother, and crazy attachment issues. If I had just had someone adopt me who could have said, "Hey, that was messed up, so we know you're going to need a lot of time to adjust. That's cool. We're here to care for you. At your age, you're already getting a sense of who you are, so we can't really change that. We can only guide you out of trouble the best we can. You don't have to call us dad or mom, you already have those. We're not here to replace them. We're here to give you the stability that they couldn't." But now the damage is done. At 27, I have almost 2 decades of pent-up stuff I now have to get rid of. So if you're going to adopt an older kid, don't expect them to be grateful. Don't expect them to love you right away. Don't expect them to be perfect. They will argue. They will get in trouble. They will scream at you that you're not their real parents. Take it all in stride. Don't overreact. This is their process for adjusting. This is what you signed up for. My adoptive mother, when we would get into arguments, would yell at me, "Fine, do you want to go back and live with your father?" It cut like a knife. This was all the first home I'd ever been in for longer than 2 years since I was born. She threatened to take away the only place I'd ever had any stability. Don't even do that to a kid. You have no idea the kind of damage you can inflict on a kid like that. Story 9. My little sister is friends with a girl whose family returned their adopted daughter. I'm not too clear on all the details, but this is what I know. They adopted this girl when she was young, so she was well beyond the essential developmental years that were mentioned above. They kept her for several years, but it is my understanding that she tormented their biological daughters into eating. It was behavior like that that ended up pushing the family into giving her back. The weird thing is, if anyone ever mentions the unadopted sister to her, my sister's friend will completely deny her ever having existed. Probably some weird coping mechanism, seeing as this adopted sister caused her to develop that. The family that sent the girl back has a reputation for being an extremely kind, loving Christian family. If this is true, the girl's behavioral problems had to have been pretty awful. That must be a really hard decision to make if your heart is in the right place. Or you could just be an insensitive a-hole who had no business looking into adopting in the first place. If some of these families who returned their adopted child had the same reason as in the story, I don't think anyone can fault them. Story 10. When I was younger, I was friends with a girl whose parents were foster parents. I knew what adoption was, but not what fostering was. Anyway, one of the kids wasn't around a few times while I was over there, so I asked where he was. My friend told me they gave him away. I was freaked out about this and told my mom. She told me what fostering children was like. A few years later, my friend and I spent almost every day together, mostly at her house. This one kid was adopted and we had a little send-off party for him. About 2 to 3 months later, he was back. I thought my friend's parents were just watching him while the other family was on vacation or something. Nope. Basically, the lady who adopted him got pregnant and didn't want 2 kids, so she gave the little boy back. After that, my friend's parents decided to adopt the boy permanently. Story 11. My mom adopted 2 children of a childhood friend. I was a toddler and she was pregnant with my birth sister, but she adopted an older boy and an infant girl. My mom had lived in foster care and wanted to help these kids avoid it. Both kids were diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, the Russian orphan disorder, probably because their mother had a severe substance problem. The mother would leave my brother sleeping in the car while she danced. My sister exhibited withdrawal symptoms until she was 6 months old, etc. My mom kept my brother for a year and my sister for 7 years before putting them up for readoption through a private agency. My sister was expelled from kindergarten, and they both experimented with fire. Lots of inpatient and outpatient therapy didn't seem to help. My dad moved out. My mom was a single parent with 2 other small children. She gave my adopted siblings up. It took me years to forgive my mom. I know she did what she thought was best and she really tried. My brother was adopted by a cool couple that did him a lot of good. And my sister was adopted by hardcore Christians who cut off contact with us. Honestly, I found her on MySpace a few years ago and she's still kind of a hot mess. She gave her own child up for adoption and quickly got pregnant again. I think in a situation like that, nobody gets to be the good guy. Story 12. While it wasn't an adoption, a year ago I took in a high school senior who really didn't have any other options. After the first month, things had finally settled down and I started to feel like he was turning some things in his life around. At this point, his birth mom re-enters the picture, but he really doesn't want anything to do with her anymore. I found out later that she won him over by promising not to make him follow any rules when he was at her house. I was naive enough to think spending time with his mom was going to be a good thing, and since it was legal by this point, I never actually adopted him. I didn't really have too much of an option. He started staying at his mom's again 1 night a week. She would buy him booze and turn a blind eye to his use of pain medications, and she got to feel like a good mother again because she was seeing her son again. His grades started to slip. He started disrespecting his teachers and me, and money started disappearing from my wallet, but he refused to acknowledge that anything was going on. It was around this time that I learned he was not only using but also selling anything he could get his hands on. grass, pain meds, Adderall, spice, etc. I finally issued an ultimatum. I told him I was willing to be patient and help him work through everything else, but that if he wanted to continue to live in my house, he needed to stop dealing. He packed his stuff that night and left. I continued to meet with him and tutor him, and all things considered, we still had a pretty good relationship despite me having to ask him to leave. I later learned that he didn't feel the same way. He started targeting other students I was working with, and soon several of them were using pills provided by him. It was brilliant on his part. He really knew how to hurt me. I've spent the last year trying to pick up the broken pieces he's left behind and feeling responsible for some students who have been or are currently struggling with a variety of things because of him. Story 13. The best friend for 2 to 3 years was put into the system by his aunt. His mom couldn't care for him and his aunt took him in, but she thought it was too much to handle. She said she couldn't put up with him anymore, so he was placed in a foster home. He was 9 the last time I saw him. I search Facebook for him a lot and still see his aunt sometimes because she owns a business close to my house. She regrets letting him go because she never heard or saw him again. She always asks me if I've found him, and if I do, to let her know. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you've made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy people who have cut their families off. What was the last straw? Story 5 is heartbreaking. See you in that video.